So don't you hate sometimes when the answer is so obvious? You've been asking a question for a long time, and all of a sudden you're trying to figure out what the answer is, and you realize it's been right there in front of you the entire time. Well, a lot of people are asking right now the question of what is God doing in the church right now through this pandemic? There's been a variety of things that we've heard from a variety of sources of people who are thinking about what God might be doing in this particular time. And I've wrestled with this question as well. I've been wondering, God, what are you doing right now? What is the church's responsibility in all of this? And how are you trying to either prune or prepare us for what's to come? And in my prayer time this morning, I was led to a passage that made the answer so obvious. It made it very, very obvious to me as God spoke to me from Matthew chapter 9, verse 38. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 38, Jesus, I'll actually go back to verse 35. He's with the crowds, and it says, "And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" Verse 38 is what caught my attention this morning in what I believe God is doing in the church. "Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Friends, there are people in our world right now that are hurting, that are lost. They are sheep without a shepherd. They are in so much pain and so much confusion right now over the things that are happening. They are harassed and they are helpless. And what God is calling us to do, I believe, is to pray that he would send laborers out into his harvest, that the harvest is ready right now for God's people to go out and be deployed to rescue harassed and helpless souls for the kingdom of heaven. But it's interesting. He says, he's telling his disciples to pray earnestly for laborers to go into the harvest. But then in chapter 10, starting at verse 1, it says, "And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction." And then he goes on to name the 12. And in verse 5 of chapter 10, he says, "These 12 Jesus sent out." So the people that he asked to pray to send laborers out were the ones whom he sent out. Friends, could I propose to you that it is very possible that when Jesus tells his disciples to pray for those whom he would send out, he's asking them to pray for themselves, to pray that they would be the ones that would be sent out, that they would realize what Jesus is using them for in order to be used in his harvest. Friends, there is definitely a need for more laborers in God's kingdom right now as the people in the world are harassed and helpless. And what I believe God is calling us to as the church today is to pray for laborers to go out into harvest, to mobilize the church to expand the kingdom of heaven, to bring the message of hope of the gospel to a lost and dying world. But he is also calling us to pray for ourselves to be those individuals who will go out and be laborers in his harvest. So could I encourage you today to pray for laborers to go out into the harvest that God has prepared for us today? That you would also pray for yourself, that you would be one of those laborers, and that God would open doors of opportunity for you to share the gospel message with harassed and helpless people as we worship him, as we serve him, as we go out as laborers for his kingdom, and as we treasure him together.